Now that we've gotten through the main trilogy of Uncharted games and seen what the series can offer on handheld hardware, I'm very excited to wrap up Nathan Drake's story in Uncharted 4. Only problem, it's already been wrapped up. Uncharted 3: Drake's Deception had a very decisive ending, with Nate finally choosing to settle down and leave the adventure behind for Elena. Why would you ruin that? So many shows and movies and video games don't know how to quit when they're ahead, and instead of going out on a high note, get dragged out until their audience loses interest. And with this series being a spearhead in modern action adventure games developed by a studio with practically no misses, shut up, I would hate to see them undo their great ending for one last ride. Did they ruin their send-off for the sake of another entry, or is this series better off with its inclusion? Let's talk about it in the spoiler review of Uncharted 4: A Thief's End. After creating staples of the PlayStation brand in their early days and delivering a beloved series that pushes the envelope, Naughty Dog deserves a head start here. So first, let's talk about the one thing Uncharted 4 undeniably has on the other entries, and that's technical performance. It's stupid. This is one of the big three of its era alongside Batman Arkham Knight and Metal Gear Solid 5, where it looks so good graphically that it could release today and no one would bat an eye, and somehow that doesn't impair the gameplay whatsoever. In the 9 hours it took me to beat this game, I had exactly one noticeable glitch, and it was these weird bubbles that show up before you hit the water. That's it. Full transparency, I am playing the Legacy of Thieves version on PS5, so it does look worse and might have more bugs on the PS4 version, but I played the hell out of this game on my PS4 Slim and remember it looking pretty much the same. And maybe that's not true. Maybe the difference is night and day, but that doesn't really matter because that extra graphical fidelity is shown on its own in the extras, seeing individual pores and wrinkles on characters. While it's nice to have, I'd clearly rather have those extras than not. The game looks its best when the beautiful graphics are working in tandem with the environmental design that looks handcrafted. You cannot look at the Kings Bay Market or the mansions of New Devon and say they look generic. Every detail tells a story, like how the weather slowly picks up over the course of Chapter 12, leading to that storm we know is coming. And my favorite example of this is that mountain, and you know exactly which one I'm talking about. It's foreshadowed subtly by practically being your North Star. It's almost always visible no matter where you are on the island, and with its unique and intimidating design, it always catches your eye. You feel drawn to it because that's where the treasure is. The place you want to explore is exactly where your goal is, that big red X on the map. And while the big set pieces and landscapes are the best example of this, especially with how accentuated it is with the great photo mode, the detail is in the minutia as well to keep that realism. There are little things that are more obvious, like how Nate gets caked in mud when he's being dragged around by the truck, or how he puts his hand on people as he squeezes through the market crowd. But I bet you didn't notice the fact that there's a fully rendered neighborhood block you can see through the window, complete with cars driving by and random goobers crossing the street. Why would they put all of that work into one part of one mission that's mostly cutscenes where you're in this little house and play Crash Bandicoot? Because they do not want the player's immersion to be broken under any circumstances, even on the off chance some nerd like me decides to stare off through the window. They could have even just had all the blinds closed, but they didn't want to risk giving a player a feeling that's off-putting. It's real small too, you don't even get a treasure collectible or anything, but I like that they reward the player for acknowledging this too by having little keepsakes and memories of the past games around the apartment. It's so cool to see the resin, the shot journal, they even have the astrolabe. Hey, maybe I can still use it. Aww. And like the graphical quality, another way Uncharted 4 was ahead of its time was by adding one little thing that I've been complaining about for a long time: a grappling hook. Every single game nowadays has a grappling hook, and I don't know if I can take it anymore. Doom Eternal, Halo Infinite, Star Wars Jedi Survivor, Sekiro, Super Mario Bros. Just when my opinion of this franchise couldn't get any lower, Black Ops 6 joins the club. There are exceptions like when they're really good or essential, but if I see one more grappling hook in a AAA game, I may just take my own life. While there absolutely were games that utilized them before, I think it's safe to say Uncharted 4 was the one that started this trend due to how phenomenal it is. I've always been a big fan of the climbing in these games. I actually find it more unique and interesting than the gunplay, but if you're someone who finds it boring, not anymore. Using the hook to swing around, climb up to safety as you hang off cliffs, and catch yourself from lethal falls heightens the spectacle that gets your adrenaline pumping and makes what was simple exciting. One of the most exciting little moments of the game is when you nearly die because the game tricks you with a fake grapple point. And those little details are here too, with him reaching for handholds and figuring out the path to take, which grounds the setting more, raising the stakes, which is later highlighted by the piton that lets you create your own handholds. And listen, they had 4 opportunities to rip out the climbing and make it more focused on the gunplay. But it makes me glad that it's still here and appreciated by Naughty Dog themselves, with how it plays into the story, like how Nate's climbing is slower and more methodical after the shipwreck, how you get to climb around modern suburban architecture for the first time, and how at the end of the game, just like how there's one big final gunfight, there's one long climbing spree, featuring the game's first and only double grapple sequence. And it's not just the climbing, they perfectly integrate set pieces into the general gameplay, like the fantastic tutorial that teaches you but puts pressure on the player into learning quickly in a set piece that has the tension to feel like a real chapter. One of my favorite examples of this is how you transition from a boss fight to a set piece by getting tossed out of a window and end up ziplining and swinging through another window right back into another gunfight. And while we're not at the characters yet, I might as well say while we're here that I do not like the character of Nadine Ross. Is it because of how she's written? Oh, not even remotely. No, she's actually just kind of a boring character, or at least just boring enough to not be able to redeem the fact that she whoops my ass on a regular basis. Now, I am not so insecure that I need the character I play as to be the strongest and the coolest and have the most sex. I actually like it when an antagonist can outdo you, here especially. Nadine is a badass. She runs her own private military. It makes complete sense that she can beat the brakes off of Nathan, but it's because the melee combat is so simple that it irritates me. It's not like I'm trying my hardest and she's just better than me. It's that there's literally nothing I can do. All you do in hand-to-hand combat is mash square and occasionally press triangle. There's no smooth and quick dodging besides rolling, but that's super clunky, so I never used it. I don't even know if you're supposed to use it. The combat is so basic that it's incredibly easy to master, and so once you have it down to the point that there's no way to improve and you're still getting whooped, it's just so defeating. And since Nadine is the only character like this, every time you see her, there's an inscription at the top of the screen that says, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." This aspect of the combat is just so remedial that I get like a Pavlovian response to dislike a whole different part of the game. It's especially obnoxious because the very last fight of the game where you fight the other villain is very involved, challenging, and more importantly, possible. That fight in particular is one of my favorites of all time too. It's so cool and so dangerous in a more intimate type of way. You're not fighting zombies, a roided out war criminal that can tank shotgun blasts, or fighting in a city that's getting buried in the desert in its entirety. It's just you and Wraith, sword fighting surrounded by the treasure you and the pirates who gathered it fought over, as you only want to leave with your brother. Yeah, it's not as big of a spectacle, but that's what I like about it. After racing each other to find Avery's millions, it's just you and him at the finish line. And there are really only like 2 other boss fights in the game, both of them being chased by a giant truck, and they do that thing I brought up earlier where they're designed to be a bridge between the gameplay and the cinematic, which, again, is done expertly. What else we got for the gameplay? We got Last of Us type crate movement, so it's cool. Yeah, there's not much I really can say about the combat that I haven't said already in a different review. Same fundamentals, solid gameplay, still some weak guns that make you go crazy, but still good old Uncharted. They even brought back enemies that are just the worst. I was one China Lake enemy away from writing a manifesto and mentioning Uncharted 4 in it by name. The only real differences are little quality of life features, like how you can kill an enemy and take their gun in the same animation if you're unarmed or out of ammo, but aside from the climbing, there weren't any core combat changes I noticed. And that's because the quality of gunfights has always fallen under the design rather than mechanical improvements, and Uncharted 4 follows that trend. Each game innovated on how you can integrate climbing into gunplay, 2 with every side of street signs and geometry, 3 with tilting the camera up to create vertical combat with its own cover, and here, you just cannot beat swinging between pirate ships to get an angle on enemies. And one chapter that's really interestingly designed is Chapter 10, as it lets you free roam in what seems to be an open world, scratching that itch, but it's deceptively linear. It adds some of the pros of open world games without actually making Uncharted an open world game, which would be unnecessarily awful. In Chapter 11, what can I even say? I think this is probably a perfect Uncharted mission, and I would absolutely say it's the best in the entire series. It has it all. Climbing, puzzles, spectacle, danger, major plot implications and story beats, shooting, jumping from car to car, on-rails combat, interactivity. There is nothing missing here, and it's captivating every step of the way. And that does sound like it could be really bad, having the 11th chapter out of 22, the halfway point, be the peak of the game. But it doesn't really feel that way at all, because that's when the story really picks up, and every moment is captivating. Yes, the game peaks at Chapter 11, but that's because the peak is Chapters 11 through 22. Chapters 1 through 10, though, it's really not all 10, just 1, 3, 4, and a little bit of 6 with how unbalanced the ratio of climbing to action is. The rest of the first half is all highlights. It's just there are a few that are less enjoyable to replay than others, and I want to say replay specifically. The flashback sucks to play a second time because it's a tutorial, and you're forced to hit a climbing speed bump when you've already gone a $120, and 3 and 4 suck intentionally, but especially when you're skipping the cutscenes and ignoring the story, because that's why they suck. Developers have to be very careful when doing this, but I think they made these 2 missions suck on purpose to get us on the same page as Nathan, where we're bored with his normal life and want to get back into the action. By making the gameplay boring, we're just as desperate as Nathan is to go on another adventure that we're willing to accept this game having a terrible story. Cause let's be real, it's bad. What kind of a story has a main character's life held hostage by a guy who makes a grand total of 1 appearance? I do like the idea of including a mob boss into a treasure hunting story, but you gotta do it right by having them actually show up. That is just plain and simple a bad story. Probably because it was cooked up by this knucklehead. This game is so good that it's bad. It's willing to disappoint you with dropped plot points to make it click later on when the twist is revealed and you realize why those points were dropped. Now, do I like that the twist is so limp-wristed that the character dynamics don't change whatsoever? One thing the plot does better than any other Uncharted story up to this point, though, is making the treasure hunt actually make sense. That was a big problem I had with the other games. Not so much with Drake's Fortune, but for example, if you want Shambhala to remain hidden, the very last thing you want to do is leave a scavenger hunt that leads directly to it. But here, it makes sense, with Avery and his chosen captains wanting to escape the law and create their own pirate utopia where they can be free men. So to find Libertalia, the other pirates need a road to follow, but one only a chosen few can walk. You have to be smart, know your history, and seek it out for peace to weed out those unworthy, those that would use it for their own advantage, or anyone hunting them. Like how when you choose the coin over the cross, you not only find out what city to go to, but one side of the coin itself tells you where to look, and the other side tells you which tower in that area you'll find the next step. And it holds up to what it's supposed to be. It's not easy to find, but every clue tracks. When we're plopped into this existing plot, which I love by the way, the one clue we have is a letter from a member of Captain Henry Avery's crew. And what does the letter say? I hope someday you will find your way into this infernal place, bear my cross, and discover the riches of paradise. And where is that next clue? The next stone on the path to the riches of paradise? Inside the cross he bears, given to him by his captain. And speaking of that cross, it makes sense that that's the artifact chosen. I'd imagine it would be difficult to find ideas to somehow string together and connect to make a treasure hunt, but to make it all cohesively thematic, that is a great feat that this game manages to pull off, because the cross isn't a crucifix. The icon of these thieves, tired of running from consequences and seeking paradise, is Saint Dismas, the penitent thief Jesus forgave at his death and brought with him to paradise. And I'm glad a lead up this good is in the game with a finish line that pays off in spades. Not only is Libertalia just about the coolest thing ever, but this isn't pirate treasure. This is the pirate treasure. The combined riches of some of the most infamous pirates in history. Not only is that a good enough chase, enough gold to make the Gunsway heist look as pathetic as my bank account, but the founders knew that too and just couldn't help themselves, leading to some of the coolest set pieces I've ever seen, but continues to tell 2 stories at the same time. One of Nathan and one of Avery's downfall, as we see his descent into madness, betrayal of those he trusted the most, and final face-off with Thomas too. It mirrors Sam and Nathan's obsession with this gold too, as it's not even about this money, it's just about winning. The fame and riches that come with it are simply bonuses to gaining the object of your obsession. Because what even is it anyway? To the Drakes and Avery, what difference would the treasure make if they're alone, on the run, or dead? The only problem with the story surrounding this gold, how the hell did it take 5 treasure hunting games to get to pirates? Seriously, when I played these games for the first time, I always started each entry hoping this is the one, and damn did they leave me sweating. The story does have 2 missions that feel very out of place at first though, and it's not because they don't fit into the larger narrative, but because one of them is genuinely, and I might be willing to say objectively forgettable. So for context, you start the game off with a flash forward with a new guy, Sam, and he and Nate seem tight until they almost die. Then it flashes way back to when Nate was a kid, and we find out Sam is Nate's brother. Yeah, after all this time, 9 years and 4 games, Nathan Drake has a brother now. Then they flash forward within the flashback to the past, but a more recent past that's still 15 years before the game takes place, where Sam dies a decade and a half before the time we first saw him. Hope he survives. You flash forward, then flash back, then flash forward within the flashback, and in all of that mess, one of those isn't paid off for another 15 chapters. The young Nate and Sam stuff is really good, but there's such a big gap that I seriously forgot it happened in the first place until that second mission where, on one hand, I was glad they didn't just completely drop that plot point, but on the other, it made the story I was super invested in just slam on the brakes. It sucks too because I don't really think there was anything they could have done about it. Since those missions end up playing out as Nate telling Elena about that night, they maybe could have included it right after chapter 11 when she finds him in King's Bay, but since we followed Nate almost the whole game and he gets knocked unconscious, that does feel like the best natural break to bring that plot back, despite how long it takes. Maybe they could have squeezed another chapter out of this plotline and put it there, but that might have broken up the pacing even more. I am very glad those missions are here though, as it's one of the best examples of how this game is a great send-off by tying back to the previous games.
Did she ever tell you her theories regarding Sir Francis Drake and his heirs? Sir Francis Drake didn't have any heirs.
Yeah. That's what history tells us.
Well, I did do my research, and apparently Francis Drake didn't have any children.
Well, history can't be wrong, you know.
Shouldn't we call the authorities or something?
Yeah, that'd be a great idea, but we don't exactly have a permit to be here.
What?
Yeah, so unless you want to end up in a Panamanian jail, we should probably handle this ourselves.
Well, what's worse?
You obviously haven't been in a Panamanian jail.
It's so cool to see his origin beyond solely in his ring, going back to his time in the orphanage after his mother's suicide, and learn why the Gunsway heist and Sir Francis Drake were so important to these two, beyond the motto. We even learn his real name.
You're Cassandra Morgan's boys.
Although, that does really solidify that he does know damn well that he isn't really Drake's descendant, and he really just stole a major piece of history. Thanks, Nate. Behind every good story, though, are good characters. Beyond the general outline of the plot, the story needs to be influenced by the characters, not vice versa. You shouldn't bend characters and have them do things they wouldn't to brute force the story to go where you want it to, and I don't know if I've ever seen a story be a better example of that than this, because this game's story is its characters. Even things beyond their control. The fact that there's even a treasure to begin with is because Avery is tired of running. He's only been doing it all his life. Does that remind you of anyone? And like these two, after finally being able to catch his breath, of course he'd be paranoid. Not having to look over your shoulder constantly like Sam with his freedom feels too good to be true. And that, mixed with his overwhelming greed like Nate's addiction to danger, leads him down a mental spiral. And yet, Nathan has a good life, but that boredom in overcorrection, even if it's a line of work in the same realm as finding lost artifacts, mixes with the perfect storm of obligation with his brother's return, the possibility of losing him again, and the path before them being one built by their deceased mother. But he's in so deep that he doesn't have an outsider's perspective like the player and Sully do, and is afraid doing what he has to will drive away his wife because it's too similar to what split them up before. It's so good you get a surplus in quality because not only does the story make sense, but you get scenes that go above and beyond, like when he walks back into the motel room and based on his reaction, you'd think Rafe's finally found him, and boom! It's the person who poses both the least and most danger to his life. And it poses a danger to me because I like these two. We finally have a game where they don't arbitrarily hate each other at the start, man. Don't do this to me. One flaw is that they do get to make up pretty quickly, but you could say that, like Nate, we're not giving Elena enough credit. She does understand. That doesn't mean she forgives him immediately or isn't still hurt. He really messed up. But it wouldn't be in character for Elena to not see where he's coming from. And yeah, like I said, the story's written in a way that the twist of Sam working with Rafe literally changes nothing. But that's because that's who Sam is. He jumped back down to help Nate during the prison escape. He's not gonna betray his brother. He's been in prison for 13 years thinking about finding that treasure with Nathan. Like Avery, he can't let it go, which is why he's the one who can't leave with the rest, which is a really smart way of letting the player see the game's adventure all the way through and find the ship while still preserving Nate's character arc. And it's because of that time he spent surviving in a hellhole of a prison that he thinks to cut the lights to steal the cross and almost kills Nadine. My two main problems with Sam though are that, while it makes sense as they're brothers, he does just feel like Nate with an accent and the snarkiness turned up 50%, and if anyone should have died chasing the treasure, it's Sam. But to be fair, if he did die, it would have made it feel like Naughty Dog just added him to have Nathan lose someone important to him without sacrificing a mainstay character. But here is where we may disagree on the characters, because I'm about to say something controversial. You know how, as we've seen, a good villain can do so much to a game's reputation that it can revise history and make people act like it's a good game? Rafe Adler smokes your top 5. Bowser? Movie sucked. Revolver Ocelot? Dick Rider. Liquid? Can't even beat his genetically inferior twin. Dutch Vanderland? Not even a villain of either of the game he's in. Andrew Ryan? Abby got him. Eggman? Fat. Sephiroth? Twink. Pyramid Head? That's just a shape. Nobody can hold a candle to my boy. He is one of the most well-written antagonists I've ever seen. He's so level-headed but so desperate. He resents his silver spoon upbringing and needs to prove to himself that he's more than his parents' fortune. He needs to earn it, and after 15 years of tracking down and trying to find this treasure, he's at his wit's end and takes the path of least resistance. Is he willing to side with Vargas? Nah, boat's outside, you're done. He goes from willing to be imprisoned in Panama to just outright buying the cross because it's easier than stealing it. From following each breadcrumb left behind to blowing the trail up because he can. But but he's smart about it. That's mainly Nadine and Shoreline going crazy with the explosives. Yeah, he's impatient, but he's careful. Nadine is clearly uninterested in the drama between Rafe and Nate and starts calling some shots, so what does he do? He ensures that she cannot get in his way by buying off her men. Even when he's betrayed at the finish line, he's so calm that he delivers one of the funniest lines in the game.
You tried to cut me out, and it's high time you learn. What are you doing?
Rafe matters so much to this game because he's the final and one of the most important but underrated links in this game. The last scene in this game that's completely smooth, rounding out a game that is so fundamentally cohesive. He's a villain that motivates and contests the characters who make decisions that form the story, which is such an action-packed story that it leads to unbelievable set pieces and gameplay, which they use to showcase how technically flawless this game can be, best shown with its character models, including their villain. I'm going to give Uncharted 4: A Thief's End a 9.5 out of 10. And what an important game to get a score that high. The unnecessary extension that needed to justify its existence. It feels like the Toy Story series, where the first 3 ended really well and were such a tight trilogy, but only wrapped up the overall story and not the main character, which the 4th pulls off. This is such a good send-off for Nathan and Elena, some of my favorite characters in gaming, giving them a happy ending that creates a life where they still get to chase that thrill, but not at the risk of losing each other. And hey, who knows, maybe with Sam and Sully's ending, or what seems to be a new start, maybe this doesn't have to be the end of the Uncharted— Oh, hey, I got a trophy.